Hi, everybody. My name is Jean-Guy Leblanc with Wellspring Growth Systems. I'm here today with Glen Dall of Apex North Business Coaching in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's one of my colleagues at Gravitas Impact Premium Coaches. There's about 80 of us around the world, and he's just south of me. And we were talking about an article that I'd read from The Economist that really resonated with each of us, and thought we'd chat about it with you here today. And so thanks for being here with me, Glen, today.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. Always good talk.
Yeah. So tell me, hey, this article, just to give everybody just a quick overview, is about what to expect after the lockdown. So before we jump into that, just curious, what's going on down in Minneapolis, Minnesota these days with lockdown, and what are CEOs talking about?
You know, interesting question, because our shelter-in-place order imposed from the governor expired on Sunday, and so now basically businesses are open up. If it's a retail location, a 50% capacity, there's still no hair salons, no restaurants yet, but pretty much everything else is open. And I'm actually here at a WeWork in downtown Minneapolis, where my office is. I've been coming here about a day a week, hardly anybody here. There was 12 to 15 people across 4 floors. And today there's a lot of people here. So people are coming out. We fortunately have really good weather. But at the same time, from a perspective of, we're kind of late in the curve. So we're still seeing a pretty healthy increase in cases, but the governor really feels strongly that we have enough hospital space, we have protection, we have first responders that are able to handle that, and we're getting in more testing equipment or test kits. So he feels good about what's happening now. We're second day in. How about up there?
Yeah, well, up here, let's say Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where I work with clients, Manitoba started opening up a couple of weeks ago, so we're now into the 3rd week of that. But it's very, very gradual here. They're taking it very slow. The case numbers are low. There's only like 300 cases here in Manitoba, but they're easing into it very, very slowly. Hair salons are open, restaurant patios are open, but not the restaurants themselves. So very slow progress with that. And in Saskatchewan, it's similar. They're taking the first initial baby steps with that. And then as of, I guess, today or yesterday, they were increasing a little bit more. I think golf courses were opening up and some other things were opening up. But again, very slow, every couple of weeks opening a little bit more. So yeah, so interesting that we're in the early days, but it sounds like Minnesota is jumping a little bit more, but great that they have the confidence, that they have the resources in place to do that.
Well, I'm glad both of us, it's not dead of winter, right?
Yeah, exactly. Bang on. So this article, yeah, I read it and thought of you, and it was basically, the article is called "The 90% Economy," kind of what the economy will look like after lockdown, and it talked about how, some research done by Goldman Sachs in China, looking at what happened to their economy after the lockdown, and also looking at what was the economic impact in different countries based on whether they had a lockdown or the degree of lockdown, and then post-lockdown. And what they found was that countries where there's a massive lockdown, with like construction and manufacturing even closed, you saw a 25% drop in GDP. And countries where they managed to keep things more open, more relaxed, or for example, China, when they came out of a lockdown, it was around 10% drop in GDP, and it hasn't gone up since then. So 10% drop since last year. And interestingly, they also found that it's not really so much driven by government policies, it's driven by consumer behavior. It's just people being uneasy going into stores, going into restaurants, going into hair salons. Their behaviors have been changed because they're afraid of the whole thing. So that's the first thing I think we need to take away from the article, is that this expectation that after the lockdown, things are going to ease up, and all of a sudden we're going to go back to business as normal, that there's going to be the opportunity for the economy to start to recover. The article, at least based on the research, is showing that won't happen until there's at least at least a vaccine, or at least herd immunity of some kind, or some resolution to this that allows people to get back together and to be closer to each other.
Right.
And the main thing is, social distancing makes certain businesses viable, but other businesses not viable, to the tune of about 10%.
Yeah.
So So that's the first big thing. What do you think that means for companies that you're working with or companies in and around Minneapolis?
Yeah, great question, great point, because you think about the service mentality types of restaurants. One of the clients I work with actually owns a kind of an event bartending business. And one of the things we're talking about there is how does that business affect it, how are restaurants affected? Because if restaurants can open to 25% capacity or 50% capacity, or that's outdoor seating only, right? How does that really impact the servers they need and the money they're making? Because restaurants still have the same fixed overhead, so it's definitely going to impact the service aspect. And then there's I've heard the phrase trickle up, which we're only 2 months into this here in the States. There's a generous unemployment, there's PPP. So I actually have clients and other businesses who are using the PPP, being the payroll protection plan, where that's potentially artificially inflating their payroll budgets, covering payroll at a time they might have normally laid people off. So I tend to agree with the article from a practical standpoint of this. We're going to see a longer tail from this of that spending diminishing depending upon the government programs and to the ability of people to go back to work. But I think, the 10% kind of rings true from what you think about that service economy spending combined with consumers not being willing to spend or not being able to spend in the ways that they could before. When was the last time anybody had a haircut? Well, maybe there.
Well, I don't know that I've had one. I haven't had one in a couple of months. So yeah, I could use one soon. My wife was talking about getting me one here this weekend, but I said, no, thank you. Yeah, this piece around frontline service workers and service businesses, open face to the public that are most at risk, that are going to be affected the most until we're able to be close to each other, essentially, right? And to your point, the article talked about discretionary spending being, for example, in China, it's down 40%. The way economists describe discretionary spending being non-essential, it's down 40%. So people buying less beer, going to less restaurants, not buying boats or things like that, right? So that'll be down. So I think we need to be factoring that in. In terms of what I'm seeing with the companies that I'm working with, they're looking at it from the standpoint of just really identifying where is the opportunity in that, right? Like what will people be spending things on or spending their money on, their discretionary dollars on? How do we need to shift our product mix in order to take advantage of where the dollars are going to be flowing? So this isn't, I don't think, a kind of completely bad news story. I mean, this is just, one collection of data points so far, but it's an early set. It's very recent, just in the last week. But I think we need to think about really that as long as there's social distancing, people need to be apart. Some businesses are more viable than others, at least at the current business model that they have. Right?
Yep.
So just adding on, thinking of other aspects of the article, it talked about three challenges in that scenario. One was fragility, the other one was less innovation, and the last one was unfairness or less fairness.
Yep.
To the first one, fragility, it talked about how it's going to be hard for people to plan. It's going to be hard for people to plan 4, 6, 8 weeks out because there's always the possibility that we could have some restrictions come back. For example, Singapore and Japan, who had the virus under control, had to step up restrictions and put new restrictions on or reimpose restrictions that they didn't originally have because things started getting out of control. Here in Manitoba with low case numbers, we can't take that for granted. Yep. What do you think that means for your area and the companies you're working with?
Yeah, I think I'm going to tie it to a conversation I had today, and actually even one of the next points you brought up in the article is the innovation standpoint. And I've got a client that they almost went out of business on March 9th. Like they got hit really, really hard and really, really fast. And had they not had a strong executive team, I think they probably would have gone under. But they, within 4 weeks, had a pivot plan that significantly changes their business model. And so, I think about innovation, I think about them because how they're changing their business model takes advantage of the current environment we're in. It also gets rid of some of the drags on their business that they had under the previous business model. Things that had always been there, annoying, but they could never really figure out a way to break away from them and change them. This has forced them to change. And another conversation we had today really goes down to the point of the how do they know what's going to happen? So it is still, again, forcing, I believe, more innovation in them of playing out more scenarios than they might have normally had they felt assured of what the path was. So while it creates uncertainty, it might waste a little energy, I think, in the short term. I think it's really smart business planning. They're still looking for the long term. They still have their North Star of where they want to take their company. Maybe that's set back 6 months, 12 months, 18, 2 years. They recognize that, but they recognize the need to look at and assess the marketplace and the data much more frequently. And they're setting up their systems and communication to do that. So I think, double-sided on what the point the article makes about that. So I think if businesses can react to be able to make changes faster based on market conditions, then I think they're in a much better place, also assuming that they're looking forward to their long-term and where they want to be long-term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's key to keep the long-term in mind, but then, like, as you say, have a business model that's going to allow them to be flexible through this period. I'm thinking even just some people that I've been talking to in the last week, a couple of professional services firms which are contemplating bringing some of their staff back to the office.
Yeah.
There's some very practical, very pragmatic, immediate type decisions to make. Does that make sense? Do we do that? Because if 8 months from now, restrictions have to be put back on and there's encouragement for us to go back to work from home, we spend all this, it took us 4 weeks to get organized and get everything set up at home, and now we're back in the office. Are we going to have to do this again? And what does that do to efficiency? Right?
Yeah.
So there's some practical concerns with that. But at the same time, I mean, there is value, getting back in the office and getting back to business.
Yeah.
I know leadership teams, I've talked with a couple of companies recently who said, well, we haven't had a management team meeting since March.
Wow.
Right? And, so because they weren't able to get together. So that just goes to show, how much of an impact this has on companies. And I think, as a business coach, I mean, you and I, we've had this conversation. We're working with our clients virtually.
Right.
So we've been figuring this out, how to facilitate virtually with virtual tools and using Miro and things like that, which I think is super important. So I think that's another piece for these companies and their leadership teams to be looking at. How do we organize so that we can meet no matter what, right? That's part of us being flexible and versatile going forward, because we don't know where we're going to necessarily be working, 6 months from now. We might be working back at home again. So we can't put the business and our management team on hold forever, right?
Right. Yeah. No, there's no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, the other third point that you had brought up by the article is that I don't think I had thought about enough. I think I did to a degree, but the unfairness of how this is disproportionate, as most of these crises are. Many times the rich get richer. If you're well capitalized enough, this is a great time to make buys. Right? There's bargains out there in the market and businesses, but it's the other end of the market, the disparity, where there's manufacturing workers or the service workers, generally on the lower end of the pay spectrum, that have less control over mobility and job choices. They're getting hit really hard, and how's that going to affect them long term? Yeah,
well, I think that's where there's a real opportunity for big picture thinking leaders to think about their impact and think about how they can contribute to, this is an opportunity, I think, for leaders to find little ways that they can make the world a bit better place, right? Like at Gravitas Impact, our purpose is to make an impact and make a difference in people's lives. So I think we enjoy working with CEOs who have that mindset. So I think there's an opportunity if we can find our companies we're working with that can find opportunities in the market where they can, grow and build their businesses, but also employ more people or employ people from a certain sector who may be getting a really raw deal right now. Maybe there's opportunities to employ people in those situations.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think going back, been in business for a long time, and it kind of, for all of us, it pushes us to think outside our box, and maybe even for labor, do they need to relocate? Do they need to learn a new skill? Do they need to migrate to a new industry where there is demand versus before there wasn't a need? Because I don't know where you are, but in Minneapolis, we had an extremely low unemployment rate previous to this, and a huge pain point for business owners was finding just, I don't say not even great talent, just good talent, just people who would show up and do the work. So it's turned that upside down. So at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities that we're all going to be forced out of our ruts, which I go back to then that forced innovation that gives me hope for the longer term.
Yeah, and I think to maybe something we can maybe speak to with the companies we work with and just encourage owners and CEOs and leaders out there is that even though maybe they're working from home and they're, it's easy to forget that performance review or to skip on the mentoring call or maybe to not do as many meetings, that could be easy to maybe get away with. But I think there's some frontline, some entry level, some middle managers, some younger people in their careers who aren't as well connected as we are. Who, I think we just owe it to them to have those meetings, have those performance reviews, have those mentoring calls, so they continue to get the development and continue to get the career mobility that they have had up until now, and then going forward as well, because we don't want to leave those people behind. And those people are our customers. They're our future. They're the future leaders of our companies. And I think we need to continue to pay attention to that as well. So it's not unfair to them. Yeah. Cool. Well, this is great. Great conversation here, Glenn. And glad we're able to dive into this article together and talk about how it impacts the companies we work with and mid-market companies in general. Any final kind of takeaways for you from this conversation?
Yeah, I think it was really great. It's really good to see that it was written about those implications. Maybe we call it the brutal facts, right? But at the same point in time, as I look back and look at the businesses I'm working with that I think have the greatest resiliency and the chance for success, I take some lessons from this conversation. One is going back to think long term but act short term. Continuing to be more agile and more innovative, fast thinking, always reading the environment because it is changing. We don't know, it could be changing. But also the talent aspect of, communicate with your teams all the way down, for your management level all the way down to those frontline employees, but also I think be open for potential recruiting opportunities if I'm an employer or if I'm a frontline worker, individual contributor, of like thinking outside of my box to where can I find opportunities, and just always trying to take advantage of, my why, it's finding a better way. Is this going to force a lot of better ways? And based on things I've seen in the past that we've been through tough times, I think we will. I have a lot of optimism. How about you?
Awesome. Yeah, for me, takeaways, that piece around innovativeness and really flexibility in business models, right? And looking for the implications, looking for the second and third order implications, right? It's easy to say, what are the opportunities, what are the threats to our business today? But to think about what happens if my landlord isn't getting paid and he has financial difficulties? Is that going to have an impact on us? What happens if one of our vendors goes under because they're not getting paid by somebody else? And discussions around contracts and people going out of business and stuff. We got to think clearly about what are the second and third order implications, what could happen, and be ready for those situations so that we can avoid and mitigate those risks. So yeah, I too think that this article from The Economist, the 90% economy, is not to be taken as a doomsday type message, but rather just face the brutal facts and then find out what can we do proactively, what can we take ownership of and act on to make the best of the situation and to grow either through or out of this recession that we're kind of entering right now. So hey, this was an awesome conversation, Glenn. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
And really appreciate you being here and kind of brainstorming this back and forth, and I look forward to chatting again.
Yeah, Zhengyi, this was great. I enjoyed it as well. So thanks for setting it up and thanks for chatting.
Awesome.